Hello, everyone, and welcome to the library's webinar, How to Read an Academic Article. My name is Megan Kowalski. I'm the Outreach and Reference Librarian, and I will be handling the chat and all the logistics behind the scenes. Today's webinar is going to be presented by my colleague, Glenn Benedict. So go ahead, Glenn.
Hello, everyone. Today we're here to talk about how to read an academic article. So I said, my name is Glenn Benedict. I am the Access Services Librarian here at UDC. And I'm just wanted to say welcome on behalf of the UDC Library and the UDC librarians. We're glad you're here, and there'll be time for questions at the end. We'll do questions both on the recording, and then once we turn off the recording, we'll have questions after that. So if you're not comfortable, having your question, either asking your question or having your question asked during the recording, we will handle it after that. And this video, this webinar also will be posted on our YouTube page as well. So in terms of what I'd like to talk about today is, first, we're going to go briefly over what is an academic article. We're going to talk about what's in academic articles. And then we're going to share some tips about how you can read an academic article. And that really should be how to efficiently read an academic article. Because a lot of times when you're doing research for an assignment or a project that you're working on, you're going to be have to sort through a lot. You might get a lot of results on the topic that you want, and so knowing how to look at an article and quickly evaluate whether this is something you want to keep or whether you want to keep looking is really important. So it's a way to look at these efficiently. So first question is, what's an academic article? So you may see this language used in your assignments, on your professor's syllabus, or they might use it in class. They may also use the term scholarly article. So that's another term that you'll hear. Another term you might hear is peer-reviewed. And those are generally all referring to the same thing. So in this case, academic or scholarly articles, kind of those are synonyms for each other. Generally, if you are an academic article or scholarly article, you have gone through a process that's called peer review. What peer review means is that before that specific article is accepted for publication, it is reviewed by another expert in the field that the article is covering. So if you are want to publish an article in a journal that's about history, before it gets accepted to be published in that journal, it'll be reviewed by somebody who is an expert in history. Academic or scholarly articles are published, as you would expect, in scholarly journals. So these are generally journals that have a pretty specific subject. So, like I said, there might be a general history journal. They can also be very, very specific. So, for instance, there are journals on, if you're thinking about music, there's journals that are just about jazz. There are journals that are just about Black musicians. There are journals that are about the history of music or the history and sociology of music. So journals can be very broad, or they can be very, very specifically focused. And what distinguishes a scholarly journal from a more popular journal, like popular journals would be something like Time magazine, that has a much broader appeal, so it's more aimed at a general audience. Whereas a scholarly journal, the articles there are really they're aimed within a community of experts and people that want to know more on that specific topic. And again, to be those journals, you rely on peer review in order to ensure that what is being published in those journals meets a certain standard of quality. The authors in these journals are experts. They're presenting new research or ideas. And they generally follow a very similar format. That's what we'll talk about next. So again, just a real quick review of, when we're talking about academic articles, this is what we're talking about. So what's in an academic article? And generally, you'll see them all organized in this way. You will have, generally first, you'll have the author or authors, and you might have to get some of their credentials, what institutions they're affiliated with, what if they have memberships in any relevant organizations, what degrees they have, that sort of thing. You may get a brief bio at the end, but not always. But the first thing you're going to find after that, and the title, is the abstract. An abstract is sort of your summary of the whole article. It's usually a couple sentences, maybe a paragraph, and this will kind of give you an overview of the entire thing. So even if the article is 20 pages, looking at the abstract, it's only going to be a couple sentences, gives you an idea if this is really something that you need to spend more time on when doing your research, or if it's not going to be covering the exact topics that you're interested in. Next up, you'll have an introduction. This is usually where you'll get the research question. So in other words, what is the research that that the authors are looking at? What question did they have that they wanted to research, or what is sort of their big idea? What is the background on their idea that they want to present? You also will have in this section of literature review. You may have done some of those in your classes already, and this would be sort of a summarization of the relevant previously published scholarly material on this topic. And so you'll find a lot of, what are the ideas and research that's already been done on this topic that already exists. We'll summarize it and then explain why our research is different or why our idea is different, and then proceed from there. Next up, if they're doing an actual experiment, you'll get the information on the methods that they used, or if they're collecting, how do they collect their data? How are they analyzing the data? Those sort of questions. If they're doing quantitative research, you might get a lot of information on, how they process their statistics. So that's really important to look at. The results, again, this is a big one that you'll want to take a look at. The results are sort of, we did this experiment, here are the results that we got. And again, if you follow there in the methods, you'll find what methods they took in order to collect the data and then to analyze the data. And then next up, you'll have the results. Discussion. In the discussion section, what you'll find is, what are the implications of this research? What new avenues of exploration does it open up? What are the ramifications for future research, but also for putting older research into new context? So you've gone through your experiment, you have the results, and now you talk about what you think that the results mean, including the potential for future research. We found this by doing our experiment. An interesting experiment that other researchers could do would be X, Y, or Z. So you'll find all of that in your discussion. Next up, you'll have the conclusion, which again summarizes sort of everything that we've talked about so far. Again, this will be a much shorter section and similar to the abstract, again, putting the whole article into context. Finally, you'll have your references. And this will be everything that the authors cited in their article. And each journal generally will use one of the established citation styles. So APA, MLA, Chicago. Some journals are a little more idiosyncratic and will have their own sort of special quirks. But, these will be, they're great places to go if you are doing further research. So if you find an article that you really like, that's talking about information that you're interested in or that is relevant for your assignment, take a look at the references section. Because a lot of times what that'll do is it'll point out to you other places that you can look for more information on this topic. A lot of times these references are referring to things that were talked about back in the literature review. So if you see something in the literature review that really stands out to you, this is where you would go to find the citation for that article or that book or chapter or whatever source of information. Then you could follow up and look at that information. So knowing all this, knowing how an academic article is laid out, what's the best way to kind of, let's say you're in a database, you're doing a search, and you get a lot of results. You've tried filtering down your list of results, but you still have a lot, and you want to know, some of them look like they might be worth using in your assignment. Some of them look like they might be, they might have some of the same keywords, but they might not be exactly what you're looking for. Well, we're going to talk about how to efficiently read through an academic article to see if it's something that you're interested in. So first things first is you want to start with the abstract. So again, that abstract is going to talk about everything that's going to be in the article itself. So if you get to the abstract and, as maybe the title of the article interested you and you thought, okay, this might be relevant to what I'm interested in. But when you might read the abstract and see, okay, this isn't really what I'm thinking about. It might be on a related subject, but might not be covering exactly what you need. Check the abstract. A lot of times the abstract will tell you what their research question is or what kind of experiment they did. So if you're doing a project on education in a public school system, but the abstract mentions that their experiment was done on students in a private school, then you can think, okay, well, this article probably is not what I'm looking for. And if you have a lot of other results that you can go to, you might want to put this one aside and not spend a lot of time, reading through the entire article. So now that you've filtered out some articles by checking the abstracts, the next thing you want to do is jump to the discussion and the conclusion. What that's going to do is that is going to, again, it's going to, because we said the conclusion is going to summarize what we've gone through so far, and the discussion is going to talk about their findings and how the results, the implications that the results have on bigger topics, bigger social issues. So again, if you think that the abstract sounds like promising, check the discussion, check the conclusion, and that'll give you a better idea on if this is really what you need. Once you've done that, then it's worth going back to the introduction, reading through the literature review. Because again, if you've gone this far and you think it's still relevant, even if you find out that the article itself isn't exactly what you want, you might find some stuff in the introduction or the literature review that's going to be helpful further. So I would say that is sort of the order you want to go through things at. And that'll save you a lot more time rather than just starting at the beginning of an article and reading the whole thing. Because once you start doing research for a while, a lot of these, if you need a lot of sources and you need, and you don't have a lot of time, articles, again, they can be short, but they can also be pretty lengthy, 10, 20, 30 pages sometimes. So to save yourself the time, start with the abstract, jump to the discussion, the conclusion, go to the introduction, and don't be afraid to, if it's not what you're looking for, maybe put it aside. You might want to bookmark it, save the search results, but move on to something else. That is the efficient way to read an academic article. So just as an example, when we talk about the abstracts. This was just a quick search I had done on censorship, as that's a topic that I'm interested in. So I just went to a database, I did a quick search for censorship, and this was an article that came up. And I was thinking more of censorship in terms of book bans in the US. That was kind of in the back of my mind when I was doing this. So looking at the title, it doesn't look like it's exactly what I'm interested in, because again, it's not the US, where they're talking about Belarus and Russia. But there are some interesting things when you look at the abstract. So the abstract is that paragraph right below the italicized word abstract. And it talks about censorship in the everyday functioning of contemporary authoritarianism. So, and in the abstract, what things that caught my eye are that in post-Soviet authoritarian regimes, censorship usually isn't the words that the author used are visible, formal, and openly repressive. But there are, but the actual constraints manifest themselves in different ways. So, like, okay, that might be interesting to take a look at then. So it's not directly relevant to what I was, the very narrow focus I was thinking about, but the idea of how does authoritarianism, manifest censorship in way when it's not technically allowed, or it's not a formal system of censorship. How does that manifest itself? So it looks like it still might be something that I'm interested in. So I would probably bookmark this and maybe take a look at it later, drop down to the discussion or conclusions, and then take a look at their introduction and their literature review. So that is just a quick example of the kind of analyzing. And if you notice, this is a 28-page article. So if I started at the beginning and read the whole thing, and I decided by the end of it, it wasn't worth using, that would be a lot of time that I've invested into this article. Whereas if I just look at the abstract and then hop down to the discussion and conclusions, I can make a better, decision on whether to keep pursuing this or not. So that is just a quick example of that. If you ever need to get in touch with a librarian, if you have questions about research, finding sources, evaluating sources, citing your sources, you can contact us by email. We have online chats. You can schedule appointments, and we're at the reference desk most days from 9 to 5 in building 41 on the 6th floor. Sorry, building 71. 41 is not open. Yes, building 71. All right, Megan, do we have any questions?
Not seeing any in the chat. We'll give it a chance for people to start typing. I want to say thank you, Glenn. It's always a great reminder that we don't need to read everything word for word when we're just trying to track down our research. I know I'm, guilty of that myself. It's always useful to know kind of what parts of the article we can skip until we really decide that it's necessary. So if you have a question, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat. We will have time for questions that are unrecorded as well. And while we give you a chance to type anything you might have, I just wanted to say thank you for attending today. The library hosts these webinars pretty regularly on Fridays at 1 o'clock, and you can sign up for anything we have upcoming through our website. All right, we have a question in the chat, and it says, once you do decide it's necessary, any speed reading tips, even like law books for later law school, things like that?
So in terms of speed reading, a lot of times what I'll do is quickly scan through for relevant keywords. Sometimes you'll get a list of keywords especially online with databases, but sometimes in print as well, or if you have like a copy of the article, sometimes at the very top, they'll have just a list of specific keywords. So for example, that last article we looked at might have censorship, Russia, Belarus, protest music, as or authoritarianism as keywords. Um, so that's what I'll do sometimes, is just like kind of just, especially with the abstract, is just scan through. So if you're looking for, like, if you're looking for stuff with public school systems, or for education for urban schools, and you see, we did this, this experiment was done at a rural school, or a school, school in, like upstate New York, or depending, if they don't specify like uh, a city. That's what a lot of times I'll do, is I'll go through and just scan that abstract for relevant keywords, or I'll, again, when maybe the abstract looks interesting, but then I'll go down to the conclusions and scan um, that. That's probably the biggest thing that I have with speed reading. I don't know if you do a lot of speed reading, Megan. I'm a fast reader just naturally, so like in terms of like having like a technique, I don't really
So I'm
have one that way.
actually not a fast reader. And so one of the things I do when I find an article I think might be interesting is, depending on what database I'm in, most of the library's databases will either underline or highlight the keywords you use to find those articles. So I'll skim through the entire piece just to see where those come up. Another trick I have done, particularly if I'm looking for, one thing in particular or one subject matter in particular, I will do Control F, which is the way you can search within a page or within a PDF. And I'll put my, a keyword or two within that to jump straight to where it might be within an article, particularly if it's longer than 20 pages. And another thing I've learned when I'm reading, if I do decide the entire article is worthwhile, my very first read, I'll just do it quickly, where essentially I will read the abstract and the discussion, but for the rest of it, I might just read the first and last sentence of each paragraph to decide, is the rest of this, section of this paper worth reading? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is worth going back and spending 45 minutes reading an entire article, but sometimes it's not. And so the more you do it, you develop your own techniques. And since I'm not a fast reader, that's one I've developed. It may or may not work for you. But I would say don't hesitate to try a few things. If you're skimming something and your brain starts to turn off, it could be that article is not of interest to what you were working on, or it could simply be you're too tired to focus on it at that moment. And so those are the tips I have used.
Another thing that I do sometimes is I will have a session where I'm just sitting down and doing searching. And then I'll go through the searching. I'll do like the briefest of like looks at the abstract. And then if it's even remote, if it seems like it's gonna be close, I'll save it. So, one day is just like collecting as much as as many sources as I can. And then later on, the next session, I'll start actually going through them and sorting them, and doing that. Is this thing going to use? Should I hold on to it just to see if, or is this, oh, this wasn't exactly what I was looking for, and I can just toss it. So I think if you have, especially for like your big assignments that you do over the course of a semester, starting right away, an easy way to start right away is just doing that, really, doing your searches, and then like pulling as many, uh, articles or PDFs and save them. And then, you can, you've started on it, which feels good. And then you can put it away for, a couple days, and then go back to it later if you don't feel, because sometimes when you're doing your, searching, reading, searching, reading, searching, reading, those are two different skill sets. And sometimes your eyes start to glaze over with your, when you're reviewing things. So that's what I tend to do, is, split them up over a couple different sessions.
Yes. Research is an art, not a science. We all develop our own ways, and everyone finds something that works for them. So just because it doesn't work for you doesn't mean it's wrong. And just because it works for you, doesn't mean it's right for someone else. That is one thing to keep in mind. So we had another question in the chat come up. If the author of a source seems legitimate and the journal does too, if there are a good number of typos, should you discard the source as illegitimate?
It's interesting. I think first you might want to double check that it's an actually published article, and not. Sometimes you'll get article. maybe a researcher will put up their, draft of an article on their website, or there are other ways of getting access to like the pre-published version of an article so that all the final edits might have gone through. So just to double check that you're using the correct document. But yeah, that would be a bit of a red flag if there were, if you know, that's when I would maybe do a little bit, if it seems like it legitimately came from that journal. Also, I mean, also just make sure that it's not like, some weird AI generated garbage, right? Like double check that, this article that you found actually was published in a real journal by a real author. But yeah, I think if I've verified that this journal does exist, this author does exist, this article does exist, and it seems to have been published in this state, that would give me pause about considering them a quality journal at the least. Because we've done webinars on, there are sort of, uh, academia is no different than a lot of other places in the world. There are scams, there are cranks, there are all sorts of, purveyors of misinformation and disinformation, and people are just interested in taking your money. So that would definitely give me pause in terms of considering that to be a legitimate source.
Yeah, and just, to add to that, if you ever come across something like this and you're not sure, you're not in this alone. Reach out to the library. That's exactly what we're here for. We are constantly looking to see and verify if material is correct. So this is not something you have to do alone, and we can save you a lot of time. Literally, all you need to do is send us the link to be like, is this real or not? And we can look into it for you. And that is something we do regularly for professors. There is a thing called predatory publishing out there where people, because faculty have to publish if they want to get tenure. And so they will run these scams to get people to publish in journals that aren't really the best places, or they'll take AI generated content because faculty are just in a rush, to get tenure. And so you don't have to do that alone. This is something we do all the time. We know what to look for. And that's what we're here for. We're here to save you time. We're here to save you frustration. So if you ever come across something like this, yes, typos are a big red flag, but it's not necessarily meaning that the item is wrong. But again, just send us a link and we are happy to verify that for you.
Any other questions?
Seeing anything come in, but our colleague Trisha did put in the chat in terms of reading tips. If you're reading it online, some databases have options of having the article read aloud. It may be a useful way to get details about the article if, like me, your attention span wavers when you're reading. That's a good one. I have often downloaded long articles as digital files, and as I'm commuting to work, I will listen to them that way. So that is something you can do, particularly if you learn better through listening. So that is an option. So thank you, Tricia, for putting that in chat. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, but I do want to give time for people to ask questions unrecorded if they prefer. So thank you for attending today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.